I do want you to know that the year of 31 was the year Tom was born, in the fall. That summer we had, I haven't talked about thrashing and harvesting, and we finally got a combine, but it did not have a bin on it. You just dragged a wagon along by the side of it. When the wagon got full, the trucker scooped the grain into the truck and took it into town after several fillings on the wagon. Well, wheat dropped to 25 cents a bushel, and Terrell decided that he could get more out of his wheat by buying hogs. Well, Jim always loved a challenge like this, and he and Georgia got in the car and went all over the panhandle buying hogs. And Terrell said, if they go to 5 cents, I can still make money off my wheat. So they bought up all the hogs, and our cousin from Antelope was working for us that winter. And he went to Amarillo. They got what they called tankage. It was the worst smelling stuff in the world. It was just horrible. It was kind of an ashy stuff, probably the cremated remains of a butchering plant. I don't know just exactly what it was. But they mixed it up with water and fed it to the hogs, and all this wheat to the hogs. And that and kept them a whole year. At the end of the year, he went to pay his note at the bank, and he lacked, I think it was $500 from coming out. The price had not only dropped to 5 cents, it dropped to 3 cents. And there was no money to be made in hogs. So, but we had had a lot of fun trying it. It certainly kept us busy through the winter. That was the year we burned coke instead of coal in our stoves. You could carry in a piece as big as your head in one hand. It was light as a feather, and I don't know, it made a beautiful fire in the fireplace. It was just a red glow and made a hot fire, but it left a residue on all of us and our houses. We all were rimmed a little with black. It was hard to, it left a suddy residue. But that was one of the things we did during the early Depression years. When the war came along, the Depression kind of went away, and we've gotten through all of that. But that is worthy of mentioning, because you can't realize how really scarce, how you couldn't even find a quarter on the place. You know, you'd start somewhere, there was just no money around. And when Roosevelt came in, he closed the banks and turned things around and began to put some programs out that were really helpful to the people. But we eased on out of that hardly knowing it, because we were easing out of the war effort at the same time. And then we got into the 50s. Our children were finishing high school. Tom went over to West Texas, and Carolyn the same. Then Tom was called into the service and was there when she finished high school. He had joined the Navy, and in his junior year in college was called to serve actively and looked forward to being on a ship. But he was sent to the Ceremonial Guard in Washington and never got near a ship except to probably welcome somebody who came into the port on one. That was his job, to be with this group that was pomp and circumstance and marched in parades and shined their shoes a lot, I think, which was not exactly what he had in mind when he went. The drought was on back in Texas, and we were depleting our herd again after many times. And this was the time that they decided that some of the ranchers had done this before. And Newton Herald took Terrell up to Kansas and introduced him to a Mr. Beatles, who had lost his herd in a flood in Kansas City in the stockyards one year. He had all this good grass in Kansas, but had never been able to restock. So we leased from him, and instead of selling here at home, we took our herd up, what we had to sell up there, and kept them all summer. It was a very good arrangement, kept us on the road with something to do a lot of the summer, but was not a good thing financially, because when they use water ponds in Kansas. They depend on rainfall for their water. Don't have windmills like we have on our ranges. And when the water ponds dried up, it was time to sell the cattle. All over the state it happened, and 30,000 head were brought into the stockyards on the same day. Well, that did not raise the price one bit. So we learned one lesson there, and Terrell said he'd never do that again. He'd sell at home and not fool with trying to outguess the market further down the line. But you took your licks like that, and you sold half your herd and you kept half your herd. Then you built your herd up again, and you went through this thing of having uneven breeding. Your cattle don't breed back like they always did when you had good weather and bad. You had calves coming all around the seasons, and they in those days, before the feedlots, we sold to buyers from the north. They had their own little feedlots, and they'd come down to buy our cattle, and that was a good time for us. We enjoyed those people that came from Iowa, came from Kansas. Year after year, the same people would buy our calves, and we put in scales here because we'd always driven them into town and weighed them at the public weighing scales. There was a time in Claude when they had a public weigher and the city scales for people to weigh their cattle, and then you put them on the railroad, shipped them into Kansas City or to Fort Worth. But, or some I think even went to California. But really, after they began to get truckers, you weighed on your own property, and you took off a certain percent of shrink, and then you dry lotted them the night before. And to dry lot means that they have no food or water for 24 hours before they're weighed. If you do that, you don't shrink. Don't take off for shrink. Those are just little things we've forgotten all about, but we put in the scales, and that drew more people to our place because not everybody had their own scales. They'd come here and weigh their cattle and go on their way. And one of the things that we took great pride in was the way our cattle looked. Jim Christian had started out with good Hereford cattle. Those J.J. cattle from the J. Ranch could have been registered, and they brought in good bulls. I don't know where they got their bulls. Probably from England, because England always has had fine cattle. The Herefords, came from England. He would bring those in, and when he was with the J.J., so he continued to raise good cattle, and they were pretty, and you had they were judged from the amount of white that went down their back or didn't go down their back, and it started at the head. You didn't want a redneck calf, he wouldn't sell, and they had to be marked exactly right. They had to conform to a certain build, a square build, and be so much in the back, so much in the front in their conformation. As soon as Terrell took over the real operation of the ranch on his own, he went up to the Lathams at Dalhart and bought some of their registered cattle, and we ran a registered herd for several years. Now, we kept the papers up on that. We had the Palladura Dominoes, we called them 1, 2, and 3. Everything has to have a separate name, and then we had we named them for our friends, and we had lots of fancy names on our cattle, and it was fun and a good bit of work. But our cattle did improve, and we had some fine cattle on the place.